Hi all. You can tell how quickly these things change. My job title changed last week. So yes, typical, isn't it? So I'm the Director of Data and Services at the Open Data Institute. And, oh, that's the right slide, it's all right. So I'm a data professional with over 20 years experience, mainly in government actually. And my love of geodata came from a number of my departments I used to work in. So I used to work at the Environment Agency, where I led the release of 2,000 data sets as open. And one of those was like the LiDAR data sets, which I presume anybody who's worked with open data would have used. I also used to work for the Department for the Environment as well as Ordnance Survey up until last year. So hello to OS people out in the crowd. And I'm here today to talk to you about why I consider, and we consider at the ODI, data as infrastructure. And I think it's really important for geodata to be considered of that. And I think Josh really covered quite a lot of the points actually about why it's so important. So I'm going to go through with you today about what is data infrastructure, why it's so important, a bit about the data ecosystem actually for geospatial, and it's quite complex, and how we can strengthen that data ecosystem. Okay, so I'll start off. It's quite bright, so I hope you're awake for this afternoon after lunch. So who's the ODI? Well, we're 10 years old now. We got set up by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, so the inventor of the World Wide Web, and Sir Nigel Shadbolt, and they're still our board members and heavily involved in the work we do. And our mission really is to work with companies and governments to build open and trustworthy data ecosystems. So we work with a range of different bodies to try and really help that data flow, because we believe in a world where data works for everybody. So we do this in a number of ways. So first of all, we help by improving the data practices of organisations. So if you need help with how to steward your data, we released a guide on trustworthy data stewardship. But we also like to tackle the challenges that stop the ecosystem from working. So things like data sharing, which can be a real problem when you're trying to get access to data, or the data ethics, which is a really hot topic, I think, at the moment, especially for geodata. Or data standards, we heard some of that earlier in Josh's talk. So we really want to help that data flow around the ecosystem. But we also do research and gather that knowledge base that we can share with you all. So let me get on to infrastructure. Oops. So what do I mean by infrastructure? So we're putting geospatial data infrastructure on the same footing as we would the rail, the network, or any other infrastructure. So if you think about the way that we maintain our roads, don't laugh about potholes, but if you were looking at it properly, then you'd make sure that you're planning it, you're investing in it, you've got somebody that looks after it. And I think the pandemic really showed, didn't it, that the clear need for trusted geospatial data infrastructure, you know, all the addresses that we needed of the vulnerable, or the location of pharmacies, or of supermarkets were all really important. So I think it was really foundational and fundamental, and I think it was as important from, you know, from the times when John Snow first tracked the cholera outbreak all those years ago in London. Geospatial is just as important then as it is today, except for the difference is now it's more ubiquitous and it's important to every industry and everybody. So that's why we need to start thinking about it as critical data infrastructure and deliberately supporting it. I always think of the examples that if you don't plan it and you don't look after that infrastructure, you could end up with roads that don't, you know, meet towns, or you just end up going around in circles. And I know you've got the magic roundabout in Hemel, but that's not the same sort of thing. So it's really about planning it and building in that support for it. So if we look at the geospatial data ecosystem, and I'll focus mainly in the UK, but there are other examples around the world. So you can split the ecosystem into another areas. You can split for those users of data, and there'll be a lot of you here today that are users of data, that is. That sounds like you're taking drugs. That's not what I meant. And then we had the holders of data, so those who collect it and steward it. And then you've got the enablers, the like of ODI and others that really try and help that flow. So if we first think about those users of data, users of geospatial data, you rely on, so many people rely on it. And as Josh was saying, you know, it's integrated in so many different things. And I think Nadine from OGC last year at our summit said that it's the glue that brings all the other data sets together, which is true. So you get most of your insights, don't you, by combining those different levels of geospatial data with other data. And you're getting that complex analysis, and the results from that means that you can assess different things, from all the different subjects we've heard today, and whether people have access to green spaces, whether there's schools nearby. I mean, it's literally there to help us understand the environment around us. So then when we think about those, you've got all those users, and there's a wealth of those, but then you've got the data holders. So who are the people that are gathering this data and who are stewarding it on behalf of others? And they're split into a number of different sections. So you get the publicly owned ones, so the likes of Ordnance Survey, so the mapping agency in the in GB, and then you've got others like the Department for the Environment or Land Registry, all those different ones that are collecting that geospatial data on the natural and built environment. Then you've got other ones like your community-based holders. So you've got others like OpenStreetMap. They're developed and obviously maintained by a combination of those volunteers as well as commercial companies, all coming together to have that, steward that data. Then the biggest one actually, which is in the increase in numbers, is in the commercial side of things. So there's a really increasing role from the likes, it did start off with Google and Microsoft and Apple in collecting it, but actually there's a lot more now. And some for the UK, the critical infrastructure is locked up in private companies like the Royal Mail, who look after the postal address file, which means that it's more restricted for others to be able to use it because that geospatial infrastructure is within that commercial company. But at the same time, we've got the proliferation now, haven't we, of like GPS and smartphones, enabler devices. So it's possible to capture information wherever you go. And there's amazing the amount of data that they've got. So you've got the likes of Strava, if anybody's, and they always call them an amateur athlete, which means I'm personally an amateur athlete. I wouldn't ever put myself as an athlete. But if you're on Strava, then you're collecting geospatial data all the time. And then you've got Uber, who you wouldn't really think of as a geospatial organisation, but they are, because actually they're just matching where people are to the taxis they've got available. And everybody's seen, haven't they, with Google, that I love that man who made the traffic jam on one of the London bridges by having a little trolley of all the smartphones when he just went over very slowly and it messed up and gave him the red line showing there was a traffic jam. I still fancy doing it myself. Haven't got enough phones. So there's lots of other people that are getting involved in this with the collection of location data. And I think it's interesting when you see the dominance of these commercial companies that are coming into this space now. And you might think, is this an issue? Well, I think it's interesting to see because Google Maps was launched in 2005, and it's been the most dominant one used worldwide, actually, with over 1 billion users. And Apple launched in 2012, but they've not really been able to rival it still. So obviously Google are doing well. But what's the issue with the dominance of these commercial companies in the geospatial space when we're thinking about stewarding that critical infrastructure? So one of the things is that they may pull out of unprofitable markets. So it could be actually they leave places or communities underserved because actually they've got a monopoly in that area, and if it's not going to make money, they could pull out. For Google in 2018, they significantly raised the prices of their Google Maps API. So I don't know if any of you were affected by that, but it was, some say, up to 1,400% they raised the cost of it, which meant that you could no longer use that API unless you put your credit card details in and paid that higher price. So that can really restrict the data that you've got available to you. Because actually, when you look at some of that data, it's better than some of the stuff that can be done in the public arena too. But on the other side, you've got a real rise in the community side of things. So OpenStreetMap, they've got all those mappers out there doing much, much more to try and bring those communities together. And if you think about some of the disaster responses that they've done in I'm just going to say disaster response. I can't get the country right. Haiti? It might be around there. Someone's going to correct me now. When they did that, they made sure they were getting the valuable supplies and first aid to the people who needed it. So I think what we've got going on here is that we talk about it as the data spectrum. So for any of you who haven't seen it, we've got a data spectrum that goes from closed data, which is the closed data you'd normally expect from things like, because it's got personal data in or other types of data that can't be shared. So that shared space where you'll share maybe for medical research, so you're going to get that benefit. Over to the other side where there's open, which means that anybody can use it and it's free to access by anyone, use and share. And if it's more open, then it actually means there's less friction and more people can do more innovation with it, which is always a good thing when you're thinking about critical infrastructure. Obviously, not all data can be open, totally understand that. You know, you've got to respect privacy, national security, and commercial confidentiality are all things that will stop you. So what does data infrastructure consist of? So it consists of a range of things. You've got your data assets, such as your data identifiers, your registers, and your data sets in there. So these are really important. They're things like your unique property reference numbers, or UPRNs. And then you've got your standards and technologies that help create and provide that access to the data sets. You've also got, and Rob mentioned it actually, the guidance and policies that help inform the management of it. Because if you don't know how to use it or how it's put together, then that can really limit what you can do with it and your understanding of it. Then you've got those organisations that govern that data infrastructure, so be them public or private, they're stewarding that data. And then you've got those communities then that are building around it, and those are impacted by those decisions. So if we think about some of the data assets, that the core data assets in the UK geospatial data infrastructure underpin our understanding of the natural and human-made landscape and how we interact with it. I mean, it includes all of those things, you know, we think about like land cover, habitats, geology, water resources. I mean, there's so many that are in that list. And then we have obviously those identifiers then, which are crucial for the process of sharing and linking that information together. And the other one that's come up recently is NUAR, obviously, that's National Underground Asset Register, where you're looking at preventing cable strikes and how that all links together and really thinking about that as critical assets. So stewarding of the geospatial infrastructure, I think about it as, well, if you think about a data steward, they're organisations that are collecting, maintaining and using that data and sharing it for a specific matter. And in the UK, obviously, that's quite complex with our mix of public and private. And the mix of it can cause challenges. So some of the challenges we might get with this model at the moment for the UK not really thinking about it as data infrastructure is that the data is fragmented. So if anybody's tried to find data sets from different government departments, then you'll know maybe you're unsure about who's releasing the data. When I worked at Ordnance Survey, we used to release beach data, but the UK Hydrographic Office used to release beach data as well. So theirs was different, obviously. It wasn't the same. We weren't duplicating. But for somebody who was a user, it was really difficult to know which one to go to. So just that understanding of who's got what and actually how they fit together as well, because they didn't always used to piece together. Then you've got things like the data is published using different technical platforms. So just bring it together can cause problems. The data can be difficult to discover and vary in quality, actually. And there can be a lack of commonly adopted standards, which all causes problems and some of those barriers to sharing. So what do we need to do then to start considering this as data as infrastructure in the UK and beyond? So we've got to start by looking at the things we can do. So first of all, it's about removing the friction caused by restrictive licensing. It's maximising the value of geospatial data to make it as open as possible. And I think it's about geospatial, it's one of those, isn't it, that's always mixed with other data sets. So if trying to release that friction to make it flow more easily so you can build the derived data sets on it is going to be really important to make sure that those licenses don't limit reuse or sharing and those insights you can gain for it. I think it's about linking and standardising data to improve the quality, making it as open as possible, those identifiers, those registers, and that relies on business models and really thinking through those business models and how they work, because actually, you know, you can't do it all for free, and how can you make that work? Interesting one, I think, for geospatial, and it's a really hot topic that I think as a geospatial community we need to consider more, is about the ethical and equitable access to geospatial data. I don't know if you saw the news at the weekend where they were talking about apps that meant that parents could track their children, and everybody was quite keen on tracking their children because everybody's worried about safety today, even though kids are safer today, but it just doesn't feel that way. And everybody was happy to, you know, have their children tracked, and even to the bit where you could turn on microphones and hear what your kids were saying. And yeah, it feels creepy. It's just not right. So the location side of things can feel really creepy. So as in this space, I think we really need to consider those side of things and making sure that the geospatial data is being used ethically. And you've got things like the Locust Charter, you know, the Benchmark Initiative we're working on to try and help with some of those data ethics principles, but it's one of those shout-outs that I think geospatial community to really think about. Because actually, if we get this right, we can have those innovative business models. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. That's all right. No, it's gone. It's gone. As soon as you say it, it's all right. Somebody once told me that if you offer somebody a tenner, if they sneeze, then they won't. I've tried it. And the last one is about open approaches to avoid closed ecosystem, to really get that data flowing through. Because geospatial data is critical infrastructure for the world. So making sure we look after it and all the things that put it together, I think are really important, and we can do it together. Questions?
Any questions for Lisa? Got one here with the front.
Hi, thanks. Really interesting. Is there any? Are you aware of anything from government? Because I think government's probably the worst one at separating that data. Though I've worked for a few businesses, and no business I've ever worked for separates their data by country or anything like that. If I go a store list, I'll do you one for nationwide. But in this country, we've got England and Wales, we've got Scotland, we've got Northern Ireland. OS, got a love and OS map, but it's only Great Britain. But a great relationship there with OS Northern Ireland. But really and truthfully, it's government and that area that's at fault, isn't it? Or where's the pressure to fix that one? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's about how it all comes together, isn't it? You're right. Yeah, I know OS, we were really quite keen on talking about its GB and not UK. And then even the geographical boundaries of the local authorities and the differences between the health services and, you know, there was just so many different different geospatial areas that just didn't match. I think sometimes it's about raising why it's a problem with government, because I don't think they always understand that mismatch and the problems it causes. So I think there's a Geospatial Commission that's now part of Cabinet Office that's there. So I think it's about those case studies and really promoting it, because you'd expect some of that leadership to come from there. Government's got a big push in, because I've only left, a year now, but they've got a Data Standards Authority, which they have got external communities involved in. So again, I think there's an opportunity to raise where the lack of standards are causing issues and trying to get those pushed through to try and help the community.
You can't, yeah, agree. I follow the Geospatial Commission and things like that. Never seen them. Sorry. Anyway, that's another question. I know exactly.
Okay, I think we're going to have to actually get through to the coffee break. If you have a